Manifesto of the Free Humans, Chapter 5. Agorism is not Anarcho-Capitalism. The goal of this essay is threefold. First, we will identify the key concepts which outline the philosophy of agorism and the strategy of counter-economics as outlined by Konkin in the New Libertarian Manifesto and an Agorist Primer. Second, we will illustrate how radicals of all stripes can utilize the strategy of counter-economics as described by Konkin without necessarily endorsing his philosophy of agorism and its specific tenets. Finally, we will describe what sets agorism apart from anarcho-capitalism and other schools of thought. We will show that although the counter-economic strategy can be utilized by nearly any individual, agorism itself is not simply a strain or a subset of anarcho-capitalism, as some believe, but rather it is a unique political philosophy of its own which can be used by anarchists of any economic background. Before we dive in, allow us to briefly explain the inspiration for the title of this essay and the essay itself. As we will demonstrate, the agorist message and counter-economic strategy can be of use to any individual who finds themselves in pursuit of a more free, just, and ethical world. However, the reason the title focuses on anarcho-capitalism is because we have noticed a trend in right libertarian and ANCAP social media circles where individuals claim to support the ideas of Konkin and his agorism, yet also express a distaste for left libertarianism. Our goal is to help readers with this viewpoint understand the essential role Konkin and his new libertarianism, or agorism, played in developing the American left libertarian movement. Agorism as consistent libertarianism. Let's start by getting an understanding of Konkin's vision. Konkin called for the creation of a revolutionary movement led by workers and entrepreneurs voluntarily cooperating in economic exchanges that take place outside of the state's grasp. He called this movement the New Libertarian Alliance. Konkin based his revolutionary ideas on a foundation of libertarianism in the vein of Rothbard and the American individualist anarchists before him. In the New Libertarian Manifesto, Konkin writes, quote, "Where the state divides and conquers its opposition, libertarianism unites and liberates. Where the state beclouds, libertarianism clarifies. Where the state conceals, libertarianism uncovers. Where the state pardons, libertarianism accuses. Libertarianism elaborates an entire philosophy from one simple premise. Initiatory violence or its threat, coercion, is wrong, immoral, evil, bad, supremely impractical, etc., and is forbidden. Nothing else is. Libertarianism, as developed to this point, discovered the problem and defined the solution: the state versus the market. The market is the sum of all voluntary human action. If one acts non-coercively, one is part of the market. Thus did economics become part of libertarianism. From this, Konkin developed his views on property. Quote, "Libertarianism investigated the nature of man to explain his rights deriving from non-coercion. It immediately followed that man, woman, child, Martian, etc. had an absolute right to this life and other property, and no other. All theft is violence initiation, either the use of force to take property away involuntarily, or to prevent receipt of goods or return of payment for those goods which were freely transferred by agreement." End quote. Konkin became involved in the burgeoning libertarian movement in the late 60s. At this point, the lovers of liberty were beginning to recognize the potential for a national movement of anti-statist, pro-market radicals. In the midst of this opportunity, Konkin saw libertarian activists being lured into, quote, "get liberty quick" schemes in the name of pragmatism, such as electoral politics. In a counterattack to the enemies of liberty, Konkin outlined a new philosophy that he believed was simply the result of applying libertarian principles to their most consistent and logical ends. Quote, "The basic principle which leads a libertarian from statism to his free society is the same which the founders of libertarianism used to discover the theory itself. That principle is consistency. Thus, the consistent application of the theory of libertarianism to every action the individual libertarian takes creates the libertarian society. Many thinkers have expressed the need for consistency between means and ends, and not all were libertarians. Ironically, many statists have claimed inconsistency between laudable ends and contemptible means, yet when their true ends of a greater power and oppression were understood, their means are found to be quite consistent. It is part of the statist mystique to confuse the necessity of ends means consistency. It is thus the most crucial activity of the libertarian theorist to expose inconsistencies. Many theorists have done so admirably, but we have attempted, and most failed, to describe the consistent means and ends combination of libertarianism. New libertarianism, or agorism, cannot be discredited without liberty or reality, or both being discredited. Only an incorrect formulation." End quote. For Konkin, a truly libertarian society would be agorist, quote, "libertarian in theory and free market in practice," end quote. This society would include a respect for justly acquired property, voluntary cooperation between entrepreneurs and producers, and replacing all of the state's services with private competition among individuals and collectives. Quote, libertarian analysis shows us the state is responsible for any damage to innocent it alleges the selfish tax evader has incurred, and the services the state provides are illusory. But even so, there must be more than lonely resistance cleverly concealed or dropping out. If a political party or revolutionary army is inappropriate and self-defeating for libertarian goals, what collective action works? The answer is agorism. End quote. The goal of agorism is to replace all non-consensual coercive relationships with voluntary relationships based on mutual benefit via entrepreneurship in the black and gray markets. This shuffling of, quote, large collections of humanity from status society to the agora, end quote, was true revolutionary activity. According to Konkin, agorists should not launch attacks on the state. We are strictly defensive, Konkin wrote in an agorist primer. Further, Konkin described an agorist as, quote, one who lives counter-economically without guilt for his or her heroic day-to-day actions, with the old libertarian morality of never violating another person or property. The philosophy stresses the importance of taking action. Quote, an agorist is one who lives agorism, except no counterfeits. There are agorists trying to live up to it. There are, of course, liars who will claim to be of anything. As Yoda said so succinctly, do or do not. There is no try. That's agorism. End quote. Counter-economics as defined by Konkin. If agorism is Konkin's premier philosophical contribution, his recognition of counter-economics as the path towards agorism is equally important. The term counter-economics can be attributed to the time and period in which Konkin developed his ideas. Quote, counterculture was a popular phrase, the only lasting victory of the hippies. Counter-economics implied that the revolution wasn't finished and that the economic system needed to undergo the same upending as the culture had, Konkin wrote. As defined above, the black and gray markets are part of the counter-economy, which Konkin defined as, quote, all non-coercive human action committed in defiance of the state, end quote. In line with the principles of non-aggression, Konkin labels initiatory violence in the form of theft or murder as the red market, the one type of activity that is shunned in his counter-economy. Konkin explains that as the state's repressive and oppressive activities increase, the people will begin seeking economic alternatives to state regulation and interference. This provides an opportunity for forward-thinking agorists to launch and support counter-economic business and activity. Konkin believed that once the counter-economy had progressed to the point where entrepreneurs were providing the public with protection and security services that could rival or defend against the state, the agorist revolution would be complete. Quote, slowly but steadily, we will move to the free society, turning more counter-economists onto libertarianism and more libertarians onto counter-economics, finally integrating theory and practice. The counter-economy will grow and spread to the next step we saw in our trip backwards, with an ever larger agorist sub-society embedded in the status society. Some agorists may even condense into discernible districts and ghettos and predominate in islands or space colonies. At this point, the question of protection and defense will become important. Eventually, of course, after a period of increasingly rapid change of this kind, the underground will break into and displace the overground, the state will wither away into irrelevance, its taxpayers, soldiers, and law enforcement people having deserted it for the marketplace, and will be left with a free agorist society. End quote. Counter-economics as a tool for all radicals. Konkin envisioned a world of decentralized peer-to-peer communities consciously and voluntarily doing business in the counter-economy as a means towards ending the state and liberating the people. The range of and opportunity for counter-economic activity has only increased with the expansion of the internet and decentralized technology like cryptocurrencies. Konkin discussed various forms of counter-economic activity, including using cash to avoid detection, barter, investing in precious metals, undocumented employment, use of illicit and illegal drugs and medicines, prostitution, bootlegging, gambling, weapons dealing, or simply providing a service while accepting payment in non-status currencies. The possibilities are essentially endless and should be welcomed by all radicals who are seeking alternatives to statism and the status quo. Any individual or collective who recognizes the economic monopoly that is maintained by continued use of the Federal Reserve Note should be supportive of counter-economic measures and investing in creating alternatives. Whether your idea of economic freedom is collective ownership or individualist in nature, agorism offers an opportunity for communes, mutual banks, time stores, and marketplaces based in the counter-economy. This will allow all non-status counter-economic ventures to cooperate and compete in the pursuit of a more free society. As we note in our first book, there is an opportunity for the creation of an agorist-mutualist alliance, and some agorist theorists are even calling for an agorist-syndicalist alliance. Quite simply, if you want to abolish the state and the privileged class who benefit from its existence, create alternatives to the current paradigm, and outgrow the archaic institutions of yesterday. We should note that Konkin was critical of communism. In Counter-Economics, Our Means, he writes, quote, "The anti-market commune defies the only enforceable law, the law of nature. The basic organizational structure of society, above the family, is not the commune or tribe or extended tribe or state, but the agora. No matter how much many wish communism to work and devote themselves to it, it will fail. They can hold back agorism indefinitely by great effort, but when they let go, the flow or invisible hand or tides of history or profit incentive or doing what comes naturally or spontaneity will carry society inexorably closer to the pure agora." End quote. Understanding Konkin's vision of agorism. It is important to distinguish counter-economic activity from full-on agorist activity. While one may be a drug dealer, prostitute, arms dealer, barber without a license, or other gray and black market entrepreneur, it does not follow that one is also a consciously practicing counter-economist or agorist. Generally, economic activity in the black and gray markets is always counter-economic because it is untaxed and removes the state from the situation. But without the awareness of the agorist philosophy and conscious effort to remove economic power away from the state, one is simply breaking the state's law. While flouting the state's laws against victimless crimes is a commendable act, it does not make one an agorist. In short, you can support and participate in counter-economic ventures without wholeheartedly embracing Konkin's ideas, but you would not be an agorist. So what differentiates agorism from anarcho-capitalism and other forms of market anarchism? As noted earlier, Konkin was a vital part of the establishment of the left libertarian movement of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. The movement of the libertarian left was born of Konkin's experiences working with Murray Rothbard and Karl Hess on Left and Right, a journal dedicated to bringing together the anti-status right and new left of the late 60s. These experiences greatly influenced Konkin's thinking and development of agorism. When asked why he chose to identify as a libertarian left or left libertarian, Konkin said he was, quote, "to the left of Rothbard," so it became natural to refer to his movement as left libertarian. He also noted his interest in continuing, quote, Rothbard's 1960 to 1969 alliance with the anti-nuke, then anti-war New Left. Quote, "Among important figures in the development of the modern libertarian movement, Konkin stands out in his insistence that libertarian, rightly conceived, belongs on the radical left wing of the political spectrum," writes David D'Amato for libertarianism.org. His movement of the libertarian left, founded as a coalition of leftist free marketers, resisted the association of libertarianism with conservatism. Further positioning it on the left, agorism embraces the notion of class war and entails a distinctly libertarian analysis of class struggle and stratification. End quote. When asked about the main differences between left libertarianism, agorism, and anarcho-capitalism, Konkin said, quote, "In theory, those calling themselves anarcho-capitalists do not differ drastically from agorists. Both claim to want anarchy, statelessness, and we pretty much agree on the definition of the state as a monopoly of legitimized coercion, borrowed from Rand and reinforced by Rothbard. But the moment we apply the ideology to the real world, as the Marxoids say, actually existing capitalism, we diverge on several points immediately." End quote. In Konkin's words, the anarcho-capitalists tend to conflate the innovator, entrepreneur, and capitalist much as the Marxoids and cruder collectivists do. Agorists are strict Rothbardians, and, I would argue in this case, even more Rothbardian than Rothbard, who still had some of the older confusion in his thinking. Konkin also said the ANCAPs of his time had a tendency to, quote, "believe in involvement with existing political parties," end quote, and, quote, "using the defense complex to fight communism, terrorism, or any other misguided cause." While it may be said that ANCAPs who support the Defense Department are a minority in 2017, the point does illustrate that since the beginning of the agorist movement, there has been an effort to segregate from the ANCAP element. With a growing segment of today's ANCAP movement being in favor of using state violence to enforce immigration and, quote, "protect cultural conservatism," it makes perfect sense that Konkin wanted to separate himself and his movement from such positions, despite the overlap between the two philosophies. Konkin believed, quote, "a lot more than statism would need to be eliminated from individual consciousness," end quote, "for a truly free society to exist." Based on this statement and his writings elsewhere, it seems clear that Konkin espoused a thick libertarianism that fights for collective liberation through individual means and does not end its analysis at statism or property rights. Indeed, Konkin specifically wrote about the oppression waged against women and the gay community, something often ignored or explicitly avoided by many ANCAPs. Another difference between Konkian libertarianism and that of right libertarians is the issue of class. Although the right typically avoid class-based analysis, Konkin helped develop what has become known as the Agorist class theory. The Agorist class theory refutes Marx's communist class theory and recognizes the difference between non-statist entrepreneurs and statist capitalists. Konkin elaborates on these ideas in an interview and in discussions on the Left Libertarian Yahoo group. Again, he stressed the importance of separating the, quote, non-innovators and pro-statist capitalists from the non-statist capitalists in the sense of holders of capital not necessarily ideologically aware, calling them, quote, neutral drone-like non-innovators, end quote. Additionally, Konkin made favorable comments towards worker movements. In the Left Libertarian Yahoo group, Konkin said he approved of the industrial workers of the world attempt to recruit libertarians. Konkin said he wanted to, quote, remind old MLL members and inform newbies that free market and pro-entrepreneur as we are, the movement of the libertarian left supports genuine anarcho-syndicalist unions which consistently refuse to collaborate with the state. In America, that's the international workers of the world and nothing else I know of, end quote. He noted that the IWW split with the U.S. Socialist Party for the same reasons his movement of the libertarian left split with the U.S. Libertarian Party. Quote, a rejection of parliamentarianism for direct action, end quote. Konkin also disagreed with conflating the terms free enterprise and capitalism with the free market. Quote, capitalism means the ideology-ism of capital or capitalists, he wrote. Before Marx came along, the pure free marketeer Thomas Hodgkin had already used the term capitalism as a pejorative. Capitalists were trying to use coercion, the state, to restrict the market. Capitalism, then, does not describe a free market, but a form of statism, like communism. Free enterprise can only exist in a free market, end quote. Konkin referred to his movement as revolutionary and radical, terms that are generally used to describe left-leaning movements and rejected by the right libertarians and conservatives. The use of terminology from the New Left was not a mistake. Konkin was consciously making an effort to distinguish his brand of revolutionary market anarchism from the growing anarcho-capitalism movement, which came to be associated with political action and cultural conservatism. In his time, Konkin saw many ANCAPs as sellouts who avoided revolutionary activity due to its social and legal risks while opting for ineffectual, vanilla lifestyles more in line with the conformity of the mainstream statist society. In conclusion, Samuel E. Konkin III successfully created an extension of libertarian philosophy by utilizing tactics that are consistent from theory to application, counter-economics, while providing a path towards a more free society. He made efforts to acknowledge the differences between his movement and others, but at the same time recognizing that the counter-economic attack can be waged by a wide spectrum of anti-statists. If we can successfully create a panarchist alliance of counter-economists, we may yet construct a truly freed market that allows free experimentation and trade between different schools of thought. In this space, we will see the conscious agorist movement flourish.